Rob Clarke from Clarke's Custom Flies, and the fly I'll be tying for you today will be the Cummings. The Cummings is a little bit of debate on who tied the fly. It was tied in the 20s and 30s in British Columbia and on Washington State. It seems to show up in books around the same time in both states. This is known as a summer steelhead pattern on the west coast, but I like to use it here in southern Ontario because we have a few rivers of Lake Erie, tributaries to Lake Erie, where the steelhead come in quite early, early August at times, in most cases, and it's more of a summer steelhead pattern, but it works very well here on these warmer steelhead waters here because the fish come in so early. It's also a great subtle pattern, and it's a great second approach pattern. If you cast to a fish and he goes after the fly and just doesn't seem to commit, it's a great size and a great natural pattern to come into on a second round, and generally the fish will take it. These are technically the original colors that it was tied in, and these colors work great here because they look a lot like natural prey that they would feed on when they come into the rivers. Let's get started tying the fly. The hook I'll be using today is a Daiichi Alec Jackson. It's a salmon steelhead hook. It's a 2051 and a size 5. I really like to use this because it's a good heavy wire hook. It's not quite as heavy as a high water hook, which would give you a very quick sink rate, but it's not as light as a low water hook through the Partridge and other series. It's a great medium hook and gives us a great range. Also, I like the sweep of the hook itself on the body. It gives it a more natural look on most of these flies, and most Spey flies. It has a good hook gap and a good sharp point. The thread that we're going to use today is UTC 70. It's a black synthetic thread. I generally use it for most of my ties now because it has a nice thin profile. It lays flat, and it's a much stronger hook than general fly tying thread. Where I'm going to start the thread today is about midway on the return eye. This allows me to check my distance on the front and allow distance in the front for the head and the materials that I'll be wrapping. And also it helps close up this return eye and give us a good thread base. So I'll start here and start coming back and close up the return eye. As you can see too, is I have a much longer tag end than most people see or use. And with the synthetic thread, it slides very nice. I'll hold it on a 45, and that'll actually push the thread and keep good close thread wraps all the way down through the body without having to fight with it so much. Trim my tag end off, and I'm going to bring the thread to just past the hook point on the hook. We're going to put a tag on this fly, so I like to bring my hook point thread just a little bit further back so that when I bring my tag up of 5 or 6 turns, it'll be equal with the point of the hook, and this will allow me proper distances for my bodies in proper proportions. So there we are, it's hanging, and I usually let the thread hang so that I can see where my proportions are, and I can see exactly where my thread ends on that hook. The next material that we're going to use is a gold small oval tinsel from Uni, or you can use whatever ones that you prefer. The original pattern actually calls for medium, but I like a little bit subtle approach for much clearer water, and it just cleans the fly up a little bit nicer, and it works very well. When I put my oval gold tinsel on, I usually start on the far side of the hook, and I bring the oval tinsel towards me and wrap it up and over. And what I've done is actually the weight of the bobbin now will hold that material in place while I check length and check where I want it. I brought the oval tinsel over to my side on the side of the return eye, and that's where I'll trim it. I'll bring all my material up to the return eye so that I keep a good steady base and we don't have a step when we get up to the front. Not as critical on this fly pattern because we'll be using dubbing on the front half, but if you were to do a silk body, it's very critical so you don't have that step there. So I'll trim that now. right up to the return eye. And I'll begin my wraps forward until I get to just beyond the hook point. So that'll be the length of my tag, and there's approximately 5 to 6 turns depending on the tinsel that you're using. Now what I will do too is I'm going to do some large spiral wraps forward, pretty much to the hook eye. And what I've done now is I've taken my bobbin out of the way and given myself a little more room for when I wrap my oval tinsel on. I'll be doing touching turns, and it'll be approximately the 3, 4, 5, and 6, and pretty much comes right to the hook point, exactly where I want it. Now the nice thing is with doing those large spiral wraps, when I return my thread backwards and I come to that point, my thread is actually now underneath the oval tinsel where I want it. I can bring my hand forward with one turn and it locks it in place. I can bring it again forward, one turn, and now we have the oval tinsel locked into place. And I'm going to now bring my thread forward 2 more turns. And with this fine oval tinsel, you can actually fold this back underneath on the bottom, wrap back to where your tag ends. And now you don't have to trim it off and add it on again. Plus you keep your step underneath and clean and out of the way. The next material that we're going to put on, and this is now going to be used for the ribbing. The next material we're going to put on is some uni silk in bright yellow. And I usually give myself enough to work with. Anytime you're cutting off materials like flosses, oval tinsels, flat tinsels, that sort of thing, it's always good to give yourself material to work with. It's better to have a little more material than too little material and run out of material. So I like to be able to be comfortable and work with enough material. I'm going to use the same technique on the floss as I did with the oval tinsel and bring it up and around so that I can keep all the material here up towards the return eye and it's locked into place. If I need to make a movement, move it around, move it anywhere else, I can do so without having to unwrap my bobbin. So again, I will trim up to the return eye. And I'm going to wrap all my thread wraps forward now, keeping the oval tinsel and the floss on this side. If you use steady pressure, it won't turn on you and want to creep this way. If it does, all you have to do is literally just a small little even up with your right hand and continue forward with your thread wraps. And I'm going to bury this all the way down now, right up to the return eye, and I will bring the thread back now to the midway point of the hook. And that's going to be the length of the unifloss that I tie in now. Some people like to do a double. I want a very thin body on the unifloss. I want it a little bit on the bright side, and this way we get a cleaner sink rate and we get a nice separation between the dubbing and the floss, and you'll see that as we approach that area. Again, I'm going to do these large thread wraps forward and begin to wrap my floss. What I do sometimes is I'll pull through. You need to keep steady pressure on your floss. If you don't, it'll tend to slacken off. Plus you want to keep it as flat as possible when it's wrapping on there. It is slightly twisted, and this will help take the twist out and allow it to lay flat. And you just want to do touching turns in front of itself, slightly overlapping all the way forward. If you have a rotary vise, you can also do that with a rotary vise. And some people also put their flosses onto a bobbin and wrap them with a bobbin. I prefer using my hand because I can keep it flatter and I can keep steady pressure on it. So I've now brought it up to the midway point. Again, I will reverse my bobbin back to where my floss is, and again the thread is underneath. I'll come up underneath, put the floss at a 90 degree, one wrap, two wrap, locks it in. trim off the floss to the point of the return eye, and put the excess to the side. Now I'm going to come up and I'm going to clean up my tag end, make it nice and neat. And again, I'm actually building up the thread body to the return eye and keeping everything nice and even, or as even as we can. The next material I'm going to use is STS trilobal dubbing in claret. I really like the STS trilobal dubbing. It's a great substitute, synthetic substitute for seal fur. It's about the closest one you can get. It's durable, has nice flash to it, gives a little bit of iridescence to the fly that seal's fur or more natural dubbing won't give. We are talking about a steelhead pattern, so I like it to be a little bit flashy. The original pattern, 1930s, called for seal's fur dubbing. If you prefer to use that, that's fine. But great substitute and easy to get is the STS trilobal. I'm not going to make a dubbing loop, and I will not be using dubbing wax. I find with dubbing wax at times the dubbing gets on too thick and doesn't give enough natural movement when we toothbrush it. But what I will do with the STS is wet both my fingers and just slightly wet the thread. This will allow the STS to stick better, and I'm just going to pinch off small minute pieces and tightly wind them on. When you're winding dubbing on, the natural reaction to do is to move your fingers backwards and forwards, so left to right, left to right. But when you're putting dubbing on, you just want to roll one motion forward to your left and allow that dubbing to lock in there. I'll put a small amount on like this to begin with, and I'll slowly build the front half of the fly up. If it begins to get loose like that, you can just tighten it back up. And I'm going to put a bit more to go forward. I'd rather layer my dubbing on a bit and go back and forth if I have to, in order to create a thicker, heavier body than to put too much dubbing on in one place and you end up with too loose a dubbing and not tight enough up there. So now I brought my dubbing up to my hook point, or to my starting point. This portion of the hook right now is bare with no thread. This has come up to the hook position, up to that position, so that we know exactly where our body's going to be. I'm now going to put a thread base up to the eye of the hook and back for when we tie off our rib and we put our hackle and our wing on. So now I'm going to bring up the oval rib and oval gold. I will use my rotary on this, and it just allows me to keep much even distance around for the ribbing up through, and I can back it up if it looks a little off. The angle changed a little bit. And you want approximately 5 to 6 turns, and you want to end underneath. Just like this. I'll do one full wrap and come up underneath the hook. Now I did the one full wrap because it actually holds the oval much better, makes it tighter. You don't have just a loose tag at the back end. And now I'm going to come up, and I made the oval tag underneath, so we can keep a flat surface on the front of the hook for now our hackle wrap and our wing. It's still nice and flat. There's not a huge bump. Hackles will wind on much better without wanting to slide off, and we can keep them there. I'm also going to take my toothbrush right now, and we're just going to slightly poke away at this dubbing and give it a little buggy look. You can use Velcro in that as well. I just find sometimes with the finer dubbing, it tends to, the finer oval tinsel I should say, the Velcro tends to break that off, and we just want to get it looking a little buggy, a little more natural underneath here. There we go. The next material I'm going to use is, this is a pheasant rump patch. Available in multitudes of colors. This one happens to be claret. And this is, they call for a claret hackle in the front. It's difficult to find claret for some reason, certain colors, especially in hackles. The feather rump patches are nice because we have long Spey style feathers here, all in claret, and then we have smaller church window styles and stuff, more smaller soft hackle if you were doing something a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to pick out a nice, fairly thick Spey style hackle, and what we mean by that is these feathers, that pull that off, these feathers have these long webby barbels that you want here that gives this a lot of movement. They're softer and gives a lot of movement. The fluffy stuff down below we're going to get rid of, and how we're going to do that is simply this. On most pheasant feathers, which are really nice, you can see a thin part of the stem going down through here, and it automatically jumps into a thicker point. What we want to do is take our thumb and forefinger where the thick point of the stem and the thin point of the stem meet. We're going to hold it just like this. Then we're going to take our left hand, we're going to come in, we're just going to slide these barbels out of the way. And when you're pulling this off and clearing this off the stem, just like so, you want to do one motion straight down. If you try to pull up on these, you'll never get them off. Always when you're stripping a stem, just pull straight down. Hold nice and tight with your thumb and forefinger and pull straight back. What you've done now is created a stem to hold on to for when you wrap your hackle. You can use hackle pliers as well. I just like to use the stem. I feel a little more comfortable with it, and I'm going to pull these fibers back. What this does is separates them a bit and gives them a nice webby look. Now, a lot of hackles you'd fold this over to wrap it, but I'm not going to, and I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to take the tip section and I'm going to lay it on about a 45-degree angle right here in front of me. I'm going to come up with one turn, make sure this stays here, 2, 3, 4 turns forward. Then I'm going to take this tip section and fold it back that we've just tied in, and I'm going to return now back to the beginning of the dubbing, 4 turns. What I've done now is essentially lock this hackle in, and locked it in really tight so when you're wrapping it's not just going to pull out. You have to be a little careful on the pressure, but it won't pull out. And I'm going to trim off these excess pieces, just like that. So they're now out of the way. I'll trim them off. I'm going to bring my thread forward again, a few wide turns, and I have my hackle now here. As you're going to see, I'm going to start pulling these down almost back to the position that they were in. What I've also done when I tied the hackle in, I tied it in on the concave side. There's a shiny side and a concave side. All feathers will be curved. They'll be slightly curved like this. You want that concave side to be against the fly so that when we turn, the natural curve will flow them back. Will flow all these barbels back. And what I do is I actually just slightly pull them back, but I don't pull them hard back. I want these, as you turn, if you leave the barbels nice and spiky like this, as you turn and come around, they begin to separate and they stay buggy. And each turn is going to be in front of the other with a slight just pull back sometimes to keep those barbels clean. And as you can see, they're staying nice and spidery, nice and separated, instead of all clumping together, and I'm wrapping each turn in front of each other. And this is what you want to get. You want to get this nice sweeping spidery look. I've come now to my last turn, just making sure these are clear. I'm going to bring my thread wraps back again. Oh, there we go, we recovered that. Anytime you have a miscue like this, material begins to slip out of your hand, that sort of thing, don't panic. Don't get freaked out that it's all done with. Just take your time, relax. A lot of the times you can reverse this back and move it forward again if you need to. Or you can wrap it back several times and just take your time and get it forward again. And that most of the time will save the material for you. Now I've gotten to the thin part of the stem where the thick part meets. I've got it underneath the head of the fly, and I'm going to come up with my thread again with one good tight turn, and it's locked in. Now everything's locked into place again. I'm going to take my left hand, pull the barbels back, come up with 2 more turns, and make sure that stem is 90 degrees underneath. What that does is lock it all in again. It tucks that stem up underneath your eyepiece for a nice, clean, flat head again, is where we're sitting. So now we're here. Fly is almost done, and we can take that soft toothbrush again and get those barbels of that pheasant flowing back and separated just like this. Now we're on to the wing, which is the final portion of our fly. The wing needs to be slightly tan, light colored, and what I like to use is the back end. This is a natural white bucktail, and I like to use this natural part on the back of the bucktail. The color is perfect. The hairs are nice and long, and we're going to stack them, and you'll see that. And they're soft. And what happens with them is, because they're softer and they're not so hollow, and you'll see when we put this on here, it won't spider out so much. It won't flare up. We can get almost like a caddis style topping on it. I'm going to pinch off a fairly decent amount from the back of the bucktail. Don't worry about how uneven or that it is, because we're going to stack it. And what I want to do is, also we're going to have lots of loose fibers back in here. So we're going to hold the bunch in our left hand, take our thumb and forefinger again of our right hand again, and it's going to pull out all the small, short, loose fibers of deer here, and you can just kind of flick it back and forth. And if you see any stragglers that are bent, funny looking ends, you can also pull them out. Then we're going to take what we call our hair stacker. This is a small to medium size hair stacker. You can get them a little smaller, get them a little bit larger. For deer here, for bucktail, we want our ends to be even on this. So we're going to put the bucktail in top side down, or the tips down, where the best color is. Get them slid right in there the best we can. It's a little long. There we go. I'm going to drop those tips just right in there, just like that. So now they're sitting, and what we're going to do is we want to hold. This has a sliding portion and a bottom portion. We're going to hold the sliding portion in place and slightly tap on the table 3 or 4 times. Now what that's done is evened up the tips of our bucktail, so they're as nice and even, and the color portions are there. The back ends are not even now, but that's okay, because we're going to get rid of them. We're going to put our hair stacker on a 90-degree angle. We're going to grab that inner portion and pull it out nice and slow. What you have now is you have all your lined up tips nice and even right here at the end. So we see they're nice and even, they're lined up nicely. We're just going to take our thumb and forefinger, our left hand, grab them all in a pinch, and pull this out. So now we have our wing portion right here of our even bucktail. And generally what I'll do is I'll just come in here, I'll give it a few taps with my index finger, and that just gets rid of any loose ends at the back. So now for the wing, we're going to measure up our wing. I like my wing to be just slightly past the tag, not quite to the back end of the hook, to the turn. So I'm going to measure it, and the tips of the bucktail are just slightly past the tag of the fly. I'm going to set the clump on top of the fly, just like so. Okay, I'm going to come in with my left hand. I'm going to do that same pinch on that deer here to hold it in place. Then you're going to come in with what they call a pinch loop. You bring your bobbin straight up to 90 degrees, and you actually pinch the thread between your thumb and forefinger. Bring your bobbin down, and I'm going to come up and do a second one as well, pinch loop, because I'd like to lock this deer hair in on top and below. Now the key is you slowly release those loops, and you want to pull your thread straight down 90 degrees till it's locked in, just like this. Now when I do my addition of wraps and stuff here, I'll always come in and always hold my material until I want it to be locked in place completely. I'm going to do 3 or 4 more turns like this. And I'm going to pull these ends straight up 90 degrees again to make sure that the wing stays on top. Come in here again, and we're going to trim off all these ends here. I'm going to continue to trim these ends off so that they clear the eye hook. Pull that wing back just slightly. So that I can clear my eye. There we go. Do a bunch of wraps. Close up my eye. Now we've gotten over the eye a slight bit, but I'll show you how to clear that. We're going to clean his head up nice. And then we're going to whip finish. And I'll show you how to clean the eye up. So, essentially there it is. I'm going to whip finish. I do a hand whip finish. There are whip finishing tools. They're a great thing to have as well, and maybe something you like to learn with, but I'm just going to come in and do my hand whip finish. And I pull my thread out quite a ways to my chest. I come up with 2 fingers underneath and turn. And you end up with, just like a regular whip finisher, you end up with a triangle. Put the tips there, 3 or 4 turns, come in, close it up, and we're going to trim this off. Now what we've ended up with is, there's the Cummings. The eye is slightly covered over from the deer here, so I'm going to show you right now how we can sort that out. Okay, so I've come in with my bodkin and I cleared the eye out slightly of the deer here, because this happens on occasion that the eye will get blocked up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my lighter. This isn't for the faint of heart, you have to be a little careful with this, but what will happen is I'm going to pull all this material back with my left hand. I'm going to take my lighter and just slightly and lightly go over that portion where the deer here was carrying over the eye. Then I'm just going to slightly heat up my bodkin a little bit and come down through. Okay, so now our eye is all cleared. We're all ready to go, and now I'm just going to apply some head cement. The head cement that I prefer to use is a product from Loon. It's called water-based head cement. It's ultra thin. It's almost the consistency of water. And what I like about it is it penetrates down through the thread and right into all your materials there. And it helps lock everything in. So I'll put a nice coat of this on. It'll penetrate down through. It only takes a couple of minutes to dry, so generally I'll put the fly to the side, and then I'll come in with a black lacquer head cement or a clear head cement just to thicken up the head and clean it up and make it a little shinier. I hope you enjoyed the tie that we've done today. Again, the fly is called the Cummings. It's a great early season and early spring steelhead pattern. Great subtle pattern for clear water. And again, I hope you enjoyed the pattern. Good luck with it.